Hey guys, today's lesson is going to be one of the most important lessons that you get as far as learning how to really solo melodically. Now, what a lot of guys do is they'll start off soloing in a position or something like that, and they'll use their major scales or pentatonic scales, and that's a great place to start. But what happens is when you just do those and you don't outline chord tones, you end up sounding like you're just rambling, like you don't know where you're going. It's sort of like wandering aimlessly on the guitar neck. So I'm going to give you an example. If I started playing and I started doing this, and I said, okay, tell me the chord changes underneath. Well, you know you're in the key of it, so you got that. But beyond that, you really don't know. And even rhythmically, like you're not sure where time is or anything like that. But you certainly don't know chords underneath. Now, if instead I did something like this. All of a sudden you hear like, oh, I think I can hear chords underneath that. Because I'm outlining chords, it becomes a lot more melodic. You can come up with better parts, better melodies, and better solos this way. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a really simple example. I'm going to start in the key of E. We're going to start on the 4 chord, which is the A chord. Go to the E chord. Then I'm going to go to the B chord and the C sharp minor chord. And I'm going to start doing a series of exercises to take you through the chord tones and how to use those in soloing. Okay, so again, I've established that I'm in here. I'm going to go to my first zone that I'm going to solo in. So if you ever get in, you're playing with some people and they ask you to solo, the first place you want to go is either your major or minor pentatonic. In this case, I'm in the key of E major. So I'm going to take my 4th finger up to the root note, that E note. If I was in E minor, I would take my 1st finger on the E note. But in this case, here's my zone that I want to be in. That's the G zone out of the caged, or I want to do the major scale. Now, I'm going to play over top of a chord progression and let you hear, if I just did these, I'm going to sound okay. So watch. All right, and that sounds pretty good. You hear a lot of people play like that. Not super duper melodic, but nice. So that's a good first place to go to. Now, what I want us to do, though, is to take this to the next level, which is really playing over each and every one of the chord changes. It's more out of the jazz school. Every time a new chord pops up, the jazzers play over top of that chord. But it's something that the great rock players all do as well. Okay, so we're going to start off on some really simple things. We're in this zone. The first thing we want to do is find out our chord tones. Okay, so I've got an A chord that's right here, which is my first chord. Then I've got an E chord here out of the G form. Then I've got my B chord. Then I've got my C sharp minor chord. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is I want to play just chord tones in a straight rhythmic fashion. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do just 3 notes to start off with. I'm going to go over top of this progression. And I'm going to just do 3 notes of each of these chords. So. Okay, once you get that down, I want to go to the next level, which is 4 notes out of these chords. The B chord will wrap it back around. It's going to go like this. Okay, so far so good. So that's... Okay, and so far this is just learning parts, but now we're going to start to use a little bit of improv skill in this day 1 section. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 2 quarter notes out of any of these chord tones, and then a half note on any of the next chord tones. Okay, so let's say I'm starting off and I do these 2 chord tones for the A. 1, 2, then I'm going to want to go to an E chord tone. Let's say I go to this one. 3, 4. Then I want to go to 2 notes out of my B chord. 1, 2, and then a note from the C sharp minor chord. 3, 4. Okay, so chord tone, chord tone, chord tone, chord tone, chord tone, chord tone. Okay, you got it? And this can be random as long as you're only playing chord tones, no other major scale or pentatonic tones, just the chord tones themselves. So it's going to go something like this. Okay, you get the idea on that part of the exercise. Then I'm going to flip this. This is all day one. So I'm going to flip this and I'm going to do a half note and 2 quarter notes. Let's try that. Okay, and you can hear that's already sounding pretty melodic, but what it's doing is starting to program your brain to hear those chord tones and to land on those chord tones on one. All right, so that's day one. We'll move on now to day 2 exercise. All right, so day 2, what we're going to do is we're going to take those exact same patterns, those exact same chord scales, or arpeggios, I should say, and we're just going to randomize them. All we're going to do is play any sort of rhythm we want, but only chord tones, no other tones than chord tones. Okay, so this is how it's going to work. So, you know, I could do... you hear how like I'm playing really randomly. It doesn't sound all that great, but it does like make your brain have to go to those chord tones and tell your brain like land on one on chord tones. So here we go with this exercise. Take that, play that for a while. It's going to be harder than you think. You're going to want to go to your natural like scale progressions and stuff like that and not use just chord tones, but it's super important on this one, just chord tones only, but any rhythms that you want. All right, and that's your day 2 practice. So let's move on now to day 3. Okay, so for day 3, we're going to start to add some different tones in. So I'm going to allow all the tones of the major scale, pentatonic, either scale you want, for in-between tones. But on the downbeat of 1, it has always got to be a chord tone. So on every downbeat, every time we switch a chord, I want it to be a chord tone. So if you play, like for instance, this note over top of 1, or this note over top of beat 1 of that A chord, there would both be wrong notes. You can only play those notes on beat 1. But here's what we're going to do is we're going to rhythmically change things up. We're going to make it really static. So I'm going to do 4 eighth notes and a half note. So I'm going to start off like this. So I can do any notes I want after the downbeat of 1 being on the chord tone. I can play any scale tone that I want, but when I get to the next chord, I've got to be on a downbeat of the chord tone. Okay, let's try this out and see how this goes. So 4 eighth notes and then a half note. 3, 4. Okay, you can hear already that's starting to sound a little bit more musical, you know, sort of a nice musicality to it. It's pretty simple, but it's still, again, hard for your brain to think like land on the downbeat on the chord tone itself, and that's what we're really training for on this one. Okay, day 3 continued. We're going to reverse that, so we're going to do a half note to start off with, and then we're going to do 4 eighth notes. So it's going to sound like this. And again, it sounds pretty melodic, you know, it's a nice melodic line there because I've sort of got these themes going. So you'll practice that for, a little bit until you really get those under your hands. That'll be our day 3 practice. Now let's move on to day 4. All right, so day 4, what we're going to do is we're going to have free rhythm and then a half note, and then a half note and then free rhythm. So we're going to start off free rhythm and then a half note. Let me show you how that goes. 3, 4. Okay, so you see how I just did any sort of rhythm that I wanted. I didn't care if I was doing triplets or 16th notes or 8th notes, any rhythm, but then a half note fall on the chord. And now let's try just the opposite. We'll start off with a half note and then we'll do free rhythms. 3, 4. Okay, so that's day 4. Let's move on now to day 5. All right, so this is day 5, and day 5, basically, all bets are off. You can do anything you want on this, but I'd like you to stay in one position, and if possible, I'd like you to outline chords within the context of this. So you can wander around a little bit. You can do some resolutions that take a little bit of time, but in general, you want to be aiming for those notes still. So I want you to keep that in the back of your mind. Don't just revert to what you've been doing in the past, but try to really see some chord shapes as we do this. All right, let's try it. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so you get the idea of what that sounds like. So good luck on that. I hope that helps you out, and I hope that's been a good lesson for you to really hear how to apply chord tones into your playing melodically. God bless until next time.